I never thought I'd end up here, lying in a sterile hospital bed, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. The constant beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell that hung in the air were a stark reminder of how far I'd fallen. My name is Evelyn, and just 3 years ago, I thought I had it all: a loving husband, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Boston, and dreams of starting a family. But now, as I stared at the blank ceiling above me, I realized how naive I'd been. It started with little things, you know? The occasional dizzy spell, feeling more tired than usual after a long day of housework. I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress or maybe I needed to eat better. Lucas, my husband, would often joke that I was just being dramatic. "Come on, Evie," he'd say with that charming smile of his, "you're too young to be feeling like an old lady." I'd laugh it off, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Weeks turned into months, and the symptoms got worse. I'd find myself out of breath just climbing the stairs to our bedroom. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, my body feeling like it was made of lead. But still, I pushed through. I had responsibilities, after all. There were meals to cook, laundry to do, and a house to keep spotless, especially with Maria, my mother-in-law, dropping by unannounced so often. Ah, Maria. Even thinking about her made my stomach churn. She was the epitome of the overbearing mother-in-law, always criticizing my housekeeping skills, my cooking, even the way I dressed. "A proper wife should always look her best," she'd say, eyeing my comfortable sweatpants with disdain. Lucas never stood up for me, always siding with his mother. "She means well," he'd say, but I knew better. It was a Tuesday afternoon when things finally came to a head. I was in the kitchen, trying to prepare dinner despite the black spots dancing in my vision. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, the sound of shattering plates ringing in my ears. Lucas found me there, barely conscious, surrounded by broken china and spilled food. Even then, as he drove me to the emergency room, his concern seemed more focused on the mess in the kitchen than on me. "Who's going to clean that up?" he muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I was too weak to argue, too scared of what the doctors might find to care about his priorities. The diagnosis came as a shock to everyone but me. Chronic fatigue syndrome, they said, coupled with severe anemia and the beginnings of ulcers. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Patel, looked at me with understanding eyes as she explained the need for immediate hospitalization. "Your body is shutting down, Mrs. Thompson," she said gently. "You need rest, proper nutrition, and time to heal." I expected Lucas to be worried, to show some sign that he cared about my well-being. Instead, he looked annoyed, as if my illness was a personal inconvenience to him. "How long will this take?" he asked Dr. Patel, not even glancing my way. "She has responsibilities at home, you know." Dr. Patel's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Thompson, your wife's health should be the priority here. She needs time to recover, and that could take weeks, maybe even months." The look on Lucas's face was one I'll never forget, a mixture of disbelief and anger. Without a word, he stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with Dr. Patel and my fears. The first few days in the hospital were a blur of tests, 4 drips, and fitful sleep. Maria visited once, her lips pursed in disapproval as she surveyed my hospital room. "Really, Evelyn," she clucked, "all this fuss over a bit of tiredness. In my day, we didn't have time to be sick." I wanted to scream, to tell her that this wasn't just a bit of tiredness, but I didn't have the energy. Instead, I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep until she left. It was a week into my stay when Lucas finally showed up again. He stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, looking every bit the successful businessman in his crisp suit. But there was no warmth in his eyes, no concern for his wife of 3 years. "Evelyn," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the fog of my medication, "you've been here for a week already. This is getting ridiculous." I tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. "Lucas, I'm sick. The doctors say I need time to dash." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Enough. You have things to do at home. Do you know how embarrassing this is? My colleagues are starting to talk. Their wives manage just fine without all this drama." His words hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I'm not making this up, Lucas. I'm really sick. Please, try to understand. But understanding wasn't in Lucas's vocabulary, not when it came to anything that inconvenienced him. He leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. If you don't come home immediately, this marriage won't survive. Enough with the theatrics, Evelyn. Be a proper wife for once. With that, he turned on his heel and left, the door slamming behind him. I stared after him, my heart pounding in my chest. How had it come to this? When had the man I loved turned into this cold, uncaring stranger? Dr. Patel must have heard the commotion because she came in shortly after, her face etched with concern. Is everything all right, Evelyn? She asked, checking my vitals. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down. But Dr. Patel wasn't fooled. She sat on the edge of my bed, her hand resting gently on mine. You know, she said softly, your health isn't just about your body. It's about your mind and your spirit too. And sometimes, the people around us can be more harmful than any physical ailment. Her words struck a chord deep within me. For the first time, I allowed myself to really think about my life with Lucas, about the constant criticism, the lack of support, the way he always put his needs before mine. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, this hospital stay wasn't just about recovering physically. Maybe it was the universe giving me a chance to reevaluate everything. As the days passed, Lucas didn't return. At first, his absence was a relief, a respite from the constant pressure and judgment. But as 1 week turned into 2, I felt a mixture of grief and a strange sense of liberation. The nurses became my friends, especially a bubbly redhead named Jenny who would sneak me extra Jell-O and tell me funny stories about her dating escapades. You deserve better, honey, Jenny told me one night as she adjusted my pillows. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her words, along with Dr. Patel's quiet support and the distance from my toxic home life, began to spark something inside me. A tiny flame of self-worth that I thought had been extinguished long ago. It was during my 2nd week in the hospital that I made a decision. I wouldn't go back to that life. I couldn't. The thought of returning to that house, to Lucas's cold indifference and Maria's constant belittling, made me physically ill. But the thought of starting over, of finding myself again, was both terrifying and exhilarating. As I lay there in that hospital bed, watching the sun set over the Boston skyline, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, of course, fear of the unknown, of being alone. But there was also hope, a fragile, flickering thing that grew stronger with each passing day. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I, Evelyn Thompson, deserved better. And I was finally ready to fight for it. The next morning, as I sipped my bland hospital coffee and picked at my breakfast, I steeled myself for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. I asked Jenny to call Dr. Patel for me. When the doctor arrived, her kind eyes filled with concern, I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been rehearsing all night. Dr. Patel, I need your help. I can't go back home. Not to him. Not ever again. And with those words, I felt the first real stirring of strength in my body. The journey ahead would be hard, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could face it. Because this time, I would be fighting for myself. After 3 weeks in the hospital, Dr. Patel finally gave me the green light to leave. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety as I packed up the few belongings I had with me, a well-worn paperback Jenny had lent me, a cozy sweater my dad had brought during his visit, and a small potted plant from the hospital gift shop that had become my silent companion. As I signed the discharge papers, my hands trembled slightly. Dr. Patel noticed and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Remember, Evelyn, you're stronger than you think. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to call. I nodded, grateful for her kindness. She had been more than just a doctor to me. She had been a lifeline, a voice of reason in the storm of my life. Before I left, she pressed a card into my hand, the contact information for a women's support group. Just in case, she said with a knowing look. The taxi ride home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to tell the driver to turn around, to take me anywhere but back to that house. But I knew I had to face this. I had to go back, if only to figure out my next steps. As we pulled up to the familiar 2-story colonial in the suburbs of Brookline, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. The neatly trimmed lawn and the cheerful flower boxes under the windows seemed to mock me with their perfection. This house that had once been my dream home now felt like a beautifully wrapped package with something rotten inside. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering my courage. The weight of my hospital bag felt like nothing compared to the heaviness in my heart. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the path and unlocked the front door. The silence that greeted me was eerie. Usually, at this time of day, I'd be in the kitchen preparing dinner, the TV would be on in the background, and I'd be listening for the sound of Lucas's car in the driveway. But now, the house felt unnaturally still. "Lucas!" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the quiet house. No response. I made my way to the living room, and that's when I noticed it. Something was off. The room looked different. Emptier. My eyes darted around, trying to put my finger on what had changed. And then it hit me, my things were gone. The collection of seashells I had gathered from our honeymoon in Cape Cod, carefully arranged on the mantel, had vanished. The colorful throw pillows I had picked out to brighten up the sofa were nowhere to be seen. Even the photos, our wedding picture, snapshots of happy times with friends, had disappeared from the walls, leaving behind only faint outlines where they once hung. My heart racing, I rushed to the bookshelf. My beloved books, from dog-eared paperbacks to cherished first editions, were all gone. The shelf that once held my eclectic mix of novels, poetry collections, and travel guides was now filled with Lucas's business books and Maria's porcelain figurines. In a panic, I ran upstairs to our bedroom, or what used to be our bedroom. I flung open the closet doors, and my breath caught in my throat. My side of the closet was empty. Every dress, every pair of shoes, every jacket, gone. I yanked open drawers, finding nothing but empty space where my clothes should have been. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. What was happening? Had I walked into the wrong house? But no, Lucas's things were all still here. It was as if someone had systemically erased every trace of my existence from this home. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, I heard the front door open and close. Footsteps on the stairs. And then Lucas was there, standing in the doorway, looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and something else, satisfaction. "You're back," he said, his tone flat and devoid of any warmth. I struggled to my feet, anger and confusion warring inside me. "Lucas, what's going on? Where are my things?" He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I told you what would happen if you didn't come home, Evelyn. You chose to stay in that hospital, playing the victim, so I decided to make some changes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You got rid of my things? All of them?" Lucas shrugged, as if we were discussing something as trivial as rearranging furniture. "You clearly didn't care about this home or your responsibilities here. I thought I'd make it easier for you to focus on what's important, this marriage and this house." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "How could you do this? Those were my belongings, my memories. You had no right." "I had every right," Lucas snapped, his cool facade cracking slightly. "I'm your husband. This is my house. And it's time you remembered your place in it." The sound of heels clicking on hardwood interrupted us. Maria appeared behind Lucas, her face a mask of smug superiority. "Oh, Evelyn, you're back. How nice of you to finally grace us with your presence." I looked from Lucas to Maria, suddenly understanding. This hadn't been just Lucas's doing, his mother had been behind this too. The realization made me feel sick. "Where are my things?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. Maria waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about all that clutter. We've cleaned things up for you. Now you can focus on being a proper wife without all those distractions." Distractions. My books, my clothes, my memories, all dismissed as mere distractions. I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. "You had no right," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Those were my possessions. My life." Lucas stepped towards me, his face darkening. "Your life. Your life is here, Evelyn. With me. As my wife. It's time you accepted that." I backed away from him, suddenly afraid. This wasn't the man I had married. Or maybe it was, and I was only now seeing him clearly for the first time. I want my things back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. All of them. Now. Maria laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Oh, darling. Those things are long gone. Donated or thrown away. You should be grateful. We've freed you from all that unnecessary baggage. I felt like I was drowning. Every cherished possession, every tangible connection to my past, gone. Just like that. I thought of my mother's pearl earrings, the last gift she had given me before she passed away. My childhood photo albums. The first edition books I had collected over the years. All of it, erased as if I had never existed. Lucas must have seen the devastation on my face because his expression softened slightly. Come on, Evie. It's not that bad. We can buy you new things. Better things. This is a fresh start for us. A fresh start? Is that what he called this violation, this erasure of my identity? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man who claimed to love me had systematically removed every trace of me from our shared life. I don't know where I found the strength, but somehow, I managed to speak. I want to be alone. Please, just leave me alone for a while. Lucas hesitated, but Maria tugged at his arm. Come on, dear. Let her sulk if she wants to. She'll come around. As they left the room, I heard Maria's voice drifting up the stairs. Really, Lucas, I don't know why you put up with her drama. In my day. I tuned out the rest, sinking down onto the bed, our bed, that now felt alien and unwelcoming. I looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. Every surface, every corner had been scrubbed clean of my presence. It was as if the last 3 years of my life had been a dream, and I had just woken up in someone else's reality. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I sat there, numb and disbelieving. What was I supposed to do now? Where could I go? I had no clothes except what I had brought from the hospital. No money of my own. Lucas had always insisted on managing our finances. No job. I had quit mine when we got married because Lucas said he wanted me to focus on our home. I thought about Dr. Patel's words, about being stronger than I thought. But in that moment, I had never felt so weak, so utterly defeated. I curled up on the bed, hugging myself tightly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to cry. As the tears flowed, I realized something. This house, stripped of everything that made it mine, was no longer my home. And the man downstairs, the one who had so callously erased me, was no longer my husband. Not in any way that mattered. I don't know how long I lay there, letting out years of pent-up frustration, fear, and anger. But as the room grew dark and the house settled into its nighttime quietness, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here. Not for one more night. Not in this house that had been stripped bare of my existence. Not with these people who clearly saw me as nothing more than an accessory to their lives. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. There was only one person I could think of to call, one person who had always been there for me, even when I had pushed him away in my misguided attempts to make my marriage work. As the phone rang, I prayed he would answer. On the third ring, I heard his familiar voice, gruff with concern. Evelyn? Is everything okay? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. Dad, I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying, I need your help. Can you come get me? Please. There was a pause, and for a moment, I was afraid he would say no. But then I heard the jingle of keys and his determined voice. I'm on my way, sweetheart. Just hold on. As I hung up the phone, I felt a small flicker of hope. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own battles. But for now, I knew one thing for certain. I was leaving this house, this life that no longer fit me. And somehow, someway, I would find a way to rebuild. Not the life I had lost, but something new. Something that was truly mine. After hanging up the phone with my dad, I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. I knew I had to move quickly. Lucas and Maria were downstairs, and I couldn't risk them overhearing my plans or trying to stop me. With trembling hands, I began to gather what little I had left. My hospital bag was still packed, containing the few items I'd accumulated during my stay. I grabbed it, along with my purse, and tiptoed to the door. As I reached for the handle, my eyes fell on the framed photo on Lucas's nightstand. It was from our wedding day, me in my white dress, beaming at the camera, Lucas looking handsome in his tux. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I picked up the frame, tracing my finger over our smiling faces. How had we gone from that to this? For a moment, I was tempted to take the photo with me. But then I remembered, this wasn't my life anymore. This wasn't my home. With a deep breath, I set the frame face down on the nightstand and slipped out of the room. The hallway was dark, but I could hear voices drifting up from downstairs. Lucas and Maria were in the living room, their tones hushed but animated. I crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky third step from the bottom. "I don't know, Mom," Lucas was saying, his voice tinged with frustration. "Maybe we went too far. You should have seen her face when she saw everything was gone." My heart skipped a beat. Was he feeling remorse? But Maria's sharp reply quickly dashed any hope of that. "Don't be ridiculous, Lucas. This is for her own good. She needs to learn her place. Your father and I had to do the same thing with your sister when she got those ridiculous ideas about going to art school." I froze on the stairs, my blood running cold. They had done this before. To Lucas's sister. I remembered meeting Sarah at our wedding, a quiet, subdued woman who barely spoke and seemed to flinch at loud noises. Was this why? Lucas sighed heavily. "I guess you're right. It's just. I didn't think it would be this hard." "Marriage isn't easy, son," Maria said, her voice softening slightly. "But you have to be firm. Women need a strong hand to guide them. Your father understood that, God rest his soul." I'd heard enough. Silently, I made my way down the rest of the stairs and slipped out the front door. The cool night air hit me like a slap, and I realized I was shaking, not from the cold, but from a mixture of fear and anger. I hurried down the driveway, looking nervously over my shoulder, half expecting Lucas or Maria to come bursting out of the house. But the door remained closed, the windows dark except for the flickering blue light of the TV in the living room. At the end of the driveway, I hesitated. Which way should I go? I didn't want to risk Lucas seeing me if he happened to look out the window. Decision made, I turned left and walked briskly down the sidewalk, away from the house that had been my prison for the past 3 years. As I walked, my mind raced. Where would I go? What would I do? I had no job, no money of my own. Lucas had always insisted on managing our finances, saying it was the man's job to handle money matters. Now I understood why. It was just another way to control me, to keep me dependent on him. I was so lost in my thoughts that I almost missed the sound of a car approaching. Panicked, I ducked behind a large oak tree, peering out to see if it was Lucas coming to look for me. But as the car drew closer, I recognized the familiar rumble of my dad's old pickup truck. Relief washed over me as I stepped out from behind the tree, waving my arms to get his attention. Dad pulled up beside me, his face a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. "Evelyn," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Are you okay? What happened?" I climbed into the truck, the familiar smell of leather and my dad's aftershave bringing tears to my eyes. "I'm okay, Dad," I said, my voice shaky. Can we just go? Please." Dad nodded, putting the truck in gear. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at the house, my house, growing smaller in the rearview mirror. It looked so normal from the outside, with its neatly trimmed lawn and cheerful yellow paint. Who would ever guess the ugliness that lurked behind those walls? We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the low hum of the radio playing an old country song. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Do you want to talk about it?" I took a deep breath, trying to figure out where to start. How could I explain the slow erosion of my self-esteem, the gradual tightening of Lucas's control over every aspect of my life? How could I make my dad understand that the daughter he'd raised to be strong and independent had allowed herself to be diminished, piece by piece, until there was almost nothing left? "They got rid of everything, Dad," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "All my clothes, my books, even Mom's pearl earrings. It's all gone." Dad's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. That son of a... He muttered, then took a deep breath. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have seen what was happening. I should have done something sooner. I reached out and put my hand on his arm. It's not your fault, Dad. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought I could fix things, make Lucas happy. I thought if I just tried harder, been a better wife. My voice trailed off as the absurdity of it all hit me. I'd spent years twisting myself into knots, trying to be what Lucas and Maria wanted me to be. And in the end, it still wasn't enough. They'd erased me, as surely as if I'd never existed. We pulled up in front of my dad's house, the house I'd grown up in. It looked exactly the same as it had when I left for college all those years ago. The porch swing where I used to read during summer afternoons, the flower beds my mom had lovingly tended, the old basketball hoop in the driveway where Dad had taught me to shoot free throws. It was like stepping back in time, to a version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. As we walked into the house, the familiar sense of home, a mixture of coffee, old books, and the faint lingering smell of my mom's favorite perfume, washed over me. Dad flicked on the lights, illuminating the cozy living room. Your room's still the same, he said, his voice gruff. I never could bring myself to change it. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day, hell, the events of the past 3 years, came crashing down on me all at once. I think I'm just going to go to bed, if that's okay, I said. Dad nodded, pulling me into a tight hug. Of course. We'll figure everything out in the morning. You're safe now, Evelyn. You're home. As I climbed the stairs to my old room, each step felt like it weighed a ton. I pushed open the door, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, my old posters on the walls, my high school trophies on the shelves, even my old stuffed bear sitting on the bed. I sank onto the familiar quilt, running my hands over the worn fabric. How had I gone from the confident, ambitious girl who'd slept in this bed to the shell of a woman I'd become? When had I lost myself so completely? As I lay there in the dark, memories washed over me. The first time Lucas had criticized my cooking, telling me I needed to learn to make meals the way his mother did. The day he'd convinced me to quit my job, saying he made enough money to support us both. The countless times Maria had made snide comments about my appearance, my housekeeping, my very existence in her son's life. Each memory was like a small cut, and as they piled up, I felt myself bleeding out, my sense of self draining away until there was almost nothing left. I'd given up my job, my friends, my hobbies, everything that made me who I was, in an attempt to be the perfect wife Lucas and Maria wanted. And still, it hadn't been enough. They'd taken the final step, erasing every trace of my existence from that house. But in doing so, they'd inadvertently set me free. In trying to break me completely, they'd given me the push I needed to finally walk away. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my childhood window, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way to rebuild my life, to rediscover the woman I used to be. It wouldn't be easy. I had no money, no job, and my confidence was in tatters. But I had my dad's support, and for the first time in years, I had hope. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never again allow anyone to make me feel small. I would never again sacrifice my own happiness and well-being for someone else's approval. The road ahead would be tough, but I was tougher. I had to be. As I drifted off to sleep, exhausted but resolute, I felt a small spark of the old Evelyn flickering to life inside me. She wasn't gone, just buried under years of doubt and fear. And I was going to do everything in my power to bring her back. I woke up disoriented, the unfamiliar yet familiar surroundings of my childhood bedroom throwing me for a loop. For a moment, I thought I was 18 again, about to head off to college with dreams of changing the world. Then reality came crashing back, and I remembered where I was and why. The events of the previous day played through my mind like a bad movie. The hospital discharge, the shocking discovery at home, the desperate call to my dad. I buried my face in my pillow, fighting back tears. How had my life come to this? A gentle knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Evelyn, my dad's voice called softly. Are you awake? I've made some breakfast if you're feeling up to it. The thought of food made my stomach churn, but I knew I needed to eat. I'll be down in a minute, Dad, I called back, my voice hoarse from sleep and unshed tears. I dragged myself out of bed and caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked lost. Pale face, dark circles under her eyes, hair a tangled mess. I barely recognized myself. With a sigh, I ran my fingers through my hair, trying to make it somewhat presentable, and headed downstairs. The smell of coffee and bacon greeted me as I entered the kitchen. Dad was at the stove, flipping pancakes. He turned when he heard me come in, a smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, sliding a plate of pancakes and bacon in front of me as I sat at the table. "How are you feeling?" I shrugged, poking at the food with my fork. "I don't know, Dad. I don't know." He sat down across from me, his own plate untouched. "Evelyn, we need to talk about what happened. About what we're going to do next." I nodded, taking a small bite of pancake. It tasted like cardboard in my mouth, but I forced myself to swallow. "I know. I don't even know where to start." Dad reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "Start at the beginning. Tell me everything." And so I did. Over cooling pancakes and bitter coffee, I told him everything. How Lucas had gradually isolated me from my friends and family. How he'd convinced me to quit my job, saying he wanted to take care of me. How Maria's constant criticism had chipped away at my self-esteem until I barely recognized myself. And finally, how they had erased every trace of me from our home, as if I had never existed. As I talked, I could see the anger building in my father's eyes, his jaw clenching tighter with each revelation. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his hand gripping his coffee mug so tightly I thought it might shatter. "I'll kill him," he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'll kill that bastard for what he's done to you." "Dad, no," I said quickly, reaching out to grab his arm. "That's not the answer. I need to figure out what to do next. How to start over." He took a deep breath, visibly trying to calm himself. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just, seeing you like this, knowing what they've done to you, it kills me, Evelyn. I should have protected you." I shook my head, feeling tears well up in my eyes again. "It's not your fault, Dad. I'm the one who let it happen. I should have been stronger, should have seen what was happening sooner." "No," Dad said firmly, his eyes meeting mine. "This is not your fault. You hear me? None of this is your fault. Lucas and that witch of a mother of his are the ones to blame. Not you." His words hit me like a physical blow, breaking through the wall of self-doubt and recrimination I'd built around myself. For the first time, I allowed myself to really believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't to blame for everything that had happened. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything that had been said hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Dad spoke again, his voice gentler this time. "We need to get you some help, Evelyn. Professional help. Someone who can help you process all of this and figure out how to move forward." I nodded, knowing he was right. "But how?" "I don't have any money, Dad. Lucas controlled all our finances. I don't even have a bank account of my own anymore." Dad waved off my concerns. "Don't worry about that right now. We'll figure it out. What's important is getting you the support you need." He got up and rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a business card. "Remember Sarah? My old colleague from the police force? She works with a women's shelter now. They have counselors there, people who can help you navigate all of this. Legal advice, too, if you need it." I took the card, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Sanctuary Women's Center. A lifeline, when I felt like I was drowning. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Dad," I said hesitantly. "It all feels so overwhelming." Dad sat back down, his face serious. "I know it's scary, Evelyn. But you don't have to do this alone. How about we give Sarah a call together? Just to see what options are available." I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and relief. Dad picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card, putting it on speaker. Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice warm and professional. "Sanctuary Women's Center, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you?" "Sarah. It's Jim Thompson," my dad said. We need your help. There was a pause, and when Sarah spoke again, her voice was filled with concern. Jim, what's going on? Are you okay? Dad looked at me, silently asking for permission. I nodded, and he continued. It's my daughter, Evelyn. She's left her husband. It's bad, Sarah. Really bad. I could hear the shift in Sarah's tone immediately, becoming more alert and focused. I see. Evelyn, are you there? Are you safe right now? I'm here, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm at my dad's house. I'm safe. Good, Sarah said, the relief evident in her voice. That's good, Evelyn. Can you tell me a little bit about what's happened? And so, for the second time that morning, I found myself recounting the story of my marriage and its collapse. Sarah listened patiently, asking gentle questions when I faltered, offering words of support when my voice broke. When I finished, Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Evelyn, I want you to know that what you're feeling right now is completely normal. What you've been through is a form of abuse, even if there were no physical violence. It's called emotional and psychological abuse, and it's just as damaging. Hearing someone else call it abuse made me flinch. Part of me still wanted to defend Lucas, to say it wasn't that bad. But I knew Sarah was right. We have resources that can help you, Sarah continued. Counseling, support groups, legal advice. We can even help you start rebuilding your life, job training, housing assistance, whatever you need. But the first step is the hardest, and you've already taken it by reaching out. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. What do I do next? I asked. If you're comfortable, I'd like you to come into the center, Sarah said. We can do an intake assessment, get you set up with a counselor, and start working on a plan for moving forward. Does that sound okay? I looked at my dad, who nodded encouragingly. Yeah, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Yeah, that sounds good. We made an appointment for the following day, and as we hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A first step on the long road to reclaiming my life. Dad pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years, I let myself truly relax in someone's arms. I'm proud of you, kiddo, he murmured into my hair. You're so much stronger than you know. As I pulled back, wiping away tears I hadn't realized I'd shed, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me still looked tired and scared, but there was something else there too. A spark of determination, a glimmer of the person I used to be. I knew the journey ahead would be hard. There would be legal battles to face, years of conditioning to overcome, a sense of self to rebuild. But standing there in my childhood kitchen, with my dad's unwavering support and the promise of help from the Women's Center, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. I wasn't the same naive girl who had walked down the aisle 3 years ago, starry-eyed and full of dreams. That Evelyn was gone, stripped away by years of subtle manipulation and overt control. But maybe, just maybe, I could build something new from the ashes of who I used to be. Someone stronger, wiser, and finally, truly free. As I helped Dad clean up the breakfast dishes, I made a silent promise to myself. This was my call for help, my lifeline in the storm. And I was going to grab onto it with both hands and never let go. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was ready to face it head-on. The next morning, I woke up to the soft golden light of dawn filtering through my childhood bedroom window. For a moment, I felt a sense of peace, as if the events of the past few days had been nothing but a bad dream. But reality quickly set in as I remembered my appointment at the Sanctuary Women's Center later that day. I got up, my muscles aching from the tension I'd been carrying. As I made my way downstairs, I could hear my dad in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling bringing a small smile to my face. It was a stark contrast to the silent, tense mornings I'd grown accustomed to with Lucas. "Morning, Dad," I said, entering the kitchen. He turned, a warm smile on his face. "Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," I admitted, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Thanks for everything, Dad. I don't know what I'd do without you." He waved off my thanks, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. "You're my daughter, Evelyn. I'll always be here for you." We ate breakfast in comfortable silence, both of us lost in our thoughts about the day ahead. As I was helping Dad clean up, a sound outside caught my attention, the unmistakable rumble of a car engine. I froze, my hand halfway to putting a plate in the cupboard. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "did you hear that?" He nodded, his expression growing serious. We both moved to the window, peering out cautiously. My heart dropped as I saw the familiar silver BMW pulling into the driveway. "Lucas. How did he know I was here?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Dad's face hardened. "Probably called around. Small town, people talk. You stay here, Evelyn. I'll handle this." But as he moved towards the door, I found myself following. "No, Dad. I need to face him. I can't hide forever." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him. He nodded, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "All right. But I'm right here with you." We stepped out onto the porch just as Lucas was getting out of his car. He looked disheveled, his usually immaculate appearance in disarray. His eyes locked onto me, a mixture of anger and desperation in his gaze. "Evelyn," he called out, striding towards us. "What the hell are you doing? Come home, now." I felt my dad tense beside me, but I put a hand on his arm, silently asking him to let me handle this. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "No, Lucas. I'm not coming home. Not now, not ever." He stopped short, looking stunned. It was probably the first time I'd ever directly refused him. "What are you talking about? Of course you're coming home. You're my wife." "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'm not your wife anymore, Lucas. I'm not your possession. You can't control me anymore." Lucas's face darkened, and he took another step forward. "Control you? Is that what you think? I've given you everything, Evelyn. A beautiful home, financial security. What more could you want?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of his statement. What more could I want? How about respect? Love? The freedom to be myself? You've taken everything from me, Lucas. My identity, my self-worth, even my belongings. Well, I'm taking it all back. He scoffed, his arrogance showing through even now. "Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. You're nothing without me. Who's going to want you now? A washed-up housewife with no job, no money, no future?" Each word was like a knife, but I stood my ground. I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than spend another day with someone who treats me like I'm worthless. Lucas's composure cracked, his face contorting with anger. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "You're not leaving me, Evelyn. I won't allow it." Before I could react, my dad was there, his hand clamping down on Lucas's wrist. "Take your hands off my daughter," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Lucas let go, stumbling back. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes as he looked at my father. "This is none of your business," he spat. "This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," I corrected, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "And it became his business the moment you laid a hand on me." Lucas looked from me to my dad, then back to me. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he realized he was losing control of the situation. Then, to my utter shock, he fell to his knees. "Evelyn, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'll do better, I promise. Just come home. We can work this out." I stared at him, this man who had once been the center of my world, now reduced to a pleading mess on my father's front lawn. Part of me, the part that had been conditioned to cater to his every whim, wanted to comfort him. But a stronger part, the part that was finally finding its voice, knew better. "No, Lucas," I said firmly. "We can't work this out. What you've done, it's not something that can be fixed with promises and apologies. It's over." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "But I love you, Evelyn. Doesn't that count for anything?" I shook my head sadly. "Love doesn't hurt like this, Lucas. Love doesn't erase someone's identity or make them feel worthless. What you feel isn't love. It's possession, control. And I'm not yours to possess or control anymore. As if on cue, another car pulled into the driveway, Maria's sleek Lexus. She got out, her face a mask of disapproval as she took in the scene before her. "What's going on here?" she demanded, striding towards us. "Lucas, get up off the ground this instant. What will the neighbors think?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of her concern. Even now, appearances were all that mattered to her. Lucas scrambled to his feet, looking lost. Maria turned her icy gaze on me. "Evelyn, stop this nonsense at once. You're coming home with us now." I met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "No, Maria. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm staying right here." Her eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little. After everything we've done for you. This is how you repay us?" "Done for me?" I repeated incredulously. "You've done nothing but tear me down, criticize me, and try to mold me into something I'm not. Well, I'm done. I'm not your puppet anymore." Maria's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me like that? Lucas, are you going to let her talk to me this way?" But Lucas just stood there, looking defeated. It was as if seeing me stand up to them had drained all the fight out of him. "It's over, Maria," I said firmly. "You can't control me anymore. Neither of you can." Maria opened her mouth to respond, but my dad cut her off. "I think it's time for both of you to leave," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." For a moment, I thought Maria might argue, but something in my dad's expression must have convinced her it wasn't worth it. She grabbed Lucas's arm, pulling him towards their cars. "This isn't over, Evelyn," she hissed as she passed me. "You'll regret this." I watched as they drove away, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. It wasn't the confrontation I had expected, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground, spoken my truth. As the sound of their cars faded into the distance, I felt my legs start to shake. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me began to ebb, leaving me feeling drained. My dad put his arm around me, supporting me. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn," he said softly. That took a lot of courage. I leaned into him, grateful for his strength. "I don't feel very courageous," I admitted. I don't know. Scared. Relieved. Sad. All at once." He nodded understandingly. "That's normal. You've just taken a huge step. It's okay to feel overwhelmed." We stood there for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The confrontation had been difficult, but I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd shed a weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. "Come on," Dad said finally. "Let's go inside. We've got that appointment at the Women's Center, remember?" I nodded, taking a deep breath. The confrontation with Lucas and Maria was over, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding my life, rediscovering who I was, it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face the challenge. As we walked back into the house, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the timid, beaten-down person I'd become. There was a spark in her eyes, a set to her jaw that spoke of newfound strength. I wasn't the same Evelyn who had left this house years ago, starry-eyed and naive. But maybe, just maybe, the Evelyn I was becoming was someone even stronger, even better. Someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. It was time to start my new chapter. And this time, I would be the author of my own story. The drive to the Sanctuary Women's Center was quiet. Dad kept glancing at me, concern etched on his face, but I was lost in my own thoughts. The confrontation with Lucas and Maria had left me feeling drained, yet strangely empowered. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself, and it felt good. As we pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript building, my nerves started to kick in again. What if they couldn't help me? What if I was beyond help? Dad must have sensed my anxiety because he reached over and squeezed my hand. "You've got this, Evelyn. I'll be right here waiting for you." I nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. The center looked welcoming enough, with potted plants by the entrance and cheerful posters in the windows. Still, my hand shook slightly as I pushed open the door. Inside, A woman with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair greeted me. "You must be Evelyn," she said warmly. "I'm Sarah. We spoke on the phone yesterday." "Hi," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's smile was reassuring. "I know this is scary, Evelyn, but you've already taken the hardest step by coming here. Why don't we go to my office and talk?" I followed her down a hallway decorated with inspirational quotes and artwork. Her office was cozy, with a comfortable-looking couch and plants on every available surface. As I sat down, I noticed a box of tissues on the coffee table. I had a feeling I'd be needing those. "So, Evelyn," Sarah began, her voice gentle, "why don't you tell me a bit more about what's brought you here today?" And just like that, the floodgates opened. I told her everything, how I'd met Lucas in college, how charming he'd been at first, how things had changed after we got married, the slow erosion of my self-esteem, the isolation from friends and family. I told her about quitting my job, about Maria's constant criticism, about feeling like I was disappearing bit by bit. When I got to the part about coming home from the hospital to find all my belongings gone, my voice broke. Sarah handed me a tissue, her face a mix of compassion and barely contained anger. "Evelyn," she said when I'd finished, "I want you to know that what you've experienced is a textbook case of emotional and psychological abuse. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." I nodded, wiping away tears. I know that, logically. But part of me still feels like I should have been stronger, should have seen it sooner. Sarah leaned forward. "Abuse doesn't happen overnight, Evelyn. It's a gradual process, like a frog in boiling water. By the time you realize how bad things are, you're already in deep. But you did something incredibly brave, you got out. That takes enormous strength." Her words washed over me, soothing some of the guilt and self-doubt I'd been carrying. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Now," Sarah said with a smile, "we start rebuilding. You're not alone in this, Evelyn. We have resources here to help you every step of the way." Over the next hour, Sarah outlined a plan. There would be individual counseling sessions to help me process the trauma and rebuild my self-esteem. Support groups where I could connect with other women who had similar experiences. Legal aid to help me navigate the divorce process and potentially get a restraining order against Lucas and Maria. "We also have job training programs," Sarah explained, "to help you get back into the workforce. And we can assist with housing if you need it, though it sounds like your dad is happy to have you stay with him for now." By the time our session ended, I felt overwhelmed but hopeful. For the first time in years, I could see a future for myself, one that didn't revolve around Lucas or trying to meet impossible expectations. As I walked out of Sarah's office, I noticed a bulletin board in the hallway. It was covered with photos, women of all ages, smiling, holding up signs that said things like 6 months free and I got the job and moved into my own place today. It was a wall of hope, a testament to the strength and resilience of women who had been where I was now. I rejoined my dad in the waiting room, and he immediately enveloped me in a hug. "How did it go, sweetheart?" "It was a lot," I admitted. "But good. I think I'm going to be okay, Dad." His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Of course you are. You're the strongest person I know, Evelyn." As we drove home, I felt a glimmer of excitement building in my chest. Tomorrow, I would start my first job training session at the center. Next week, I had my first group therapy meeting. Small steps, but steps forward nonetheless. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. There were days when I felt on top of the world, ready to take on anything. And there were days when I could barely get out of bed, when the weight of everything I'd been through threatened to crush me. But slowly, surely, I began to find my footing. The job training program at the center helped me brush up on my skills and build my confidence. With their help, I landed a part-time job at a local bookstore. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first paycheck I'd earned in years brought tears to my eyes. Therapy was hard work, forcing me to confront years of manipulation and self-doubt. But with each session, I felt a little stronger, a little more like the Evelyn I used to be, or maybe a new, improved version of her. The support group became a lifeline. Listening to other women share their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. There was Maria, who had left her abusive husband after 30 years of marriage and was now training to be a counselor herself. There was Jess, a young mom who had fled an abusive relationship with her toddler in tow, now working towards her degree. Their strength inspired me, their friendship sustained me. Lucas tried to contact me a few times in those early months. Tearful voicemails, pleading texts. Each one was harder to ignore than the last. But with the support of my dad, Sarah, and my new friends at the center, I stood firm. I changed my number, got a restraining order. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. 6 months after that fateful day when I'd left the hospital to find my life erased, I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom. The woman looking back at me was different from the broken shell who had arrived on her father's doorstep half a year ago. My hair was shorter now, I'd cut it on impulse one day, a symbolic shedding of my old self. There was color in my cheeks, a sparkle in my eyes that had been missing for far too long. I was far from healed. I knew that recovery was a journey, not a destination. There were still nights when I woke up in a cold sweat, still days when self-doubt crept in. But I was getting there, one day at a time. As I got ready for work that morning, I had been promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore. I thought about how far I'd come. I had my own bank account now, was saving up for my own apartment. I had rediscovered old hobbies and found new ones. I had friends, real friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. Most importantly, I had found my voice again. The Evelyn who had disappeared into Lucas and Maria's expectations was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. Before I left for work, I stopped by the kitchen where Dad was having his morning coffee. "I've been thinking," I said, pouring myself a cup. "I want to go back to school. Finish my degree." Dad's face lit up. "That's wonderful, Evelyn. Have you thought about what you want to study?" I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "Social work. I want to help women like me, Dad. I want to be for them what Sarah and the center have been for me." He got up and pulled me into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud." As I hugged him back, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would be challenges, setbacks, days when it felt like I was taking 2 steps back for every step forward. But for the first time in years, I was excited about the future. I was writing my own story now, and it was shaping up to be one of resilience, of growth, of newfound strength. As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, ready to face another day, I smiled to myself. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. And I couldn't wait to see where it would take me next.